also the first time I'm revealing my face to my audience, so that's interesting.
Oh,
So it says we're live. We can get the party started. What's going on, guys? Welcome to the first episode of Let's Talk Comics with the one and only Bryan Edward Hill. If you guys aren't super aware of what this awesome guy's been up to, he is writing a 5-issue arc on Detective Comics right now. He's been on the Wildstorm Michael Cray title since its recent inception via Rebirth, and he's working on writing for the for the Titans DC Universe TV show. So before we get started, obviously, thank you so much, Bryan, for being on. It's a pleasure for me, and I'm sure the audience to get a little bit of insight to what's going on in that head of yours.
well, thank you for having me on, man. I'm trying to get used to the new world of media.
Yep.
So this is great. I did a thing with Scott. That was like I think it might be like my third YouTube thing, but I hadn't done one in a long time before the thing I did with Scott. So now I'm starting to get into the flow of it, I guess, getting used to a webcam and microphone in front of my face.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time I've actually live streamed my face on the internet, so it'll.
You got to go right to the face reveal because you don't want to make them wait. See, because the longer you make them wait for the face reveal, the more they're going to judge your face when they see it. You got to just like give them the face from the beginning. That's why if you look at the Scott video, I haven't shaved. I'm like, no. I'm going to look so ratty. I'm going to look really ratty on this so that no one has any weird expectations that like Denzel Washington is going to show up. It's like, no. It's just me. You got to get used to this. This is what I got. Get used to this.
Well, I'm hoping they can get used to this at some point. But man, it's so. What have you been up to lately?
Well, let me see. Writing a lot of stuff, man. I mean, I've got. So Detective is still in the middle of its run. I believe the next issue hits Wednesday.
Yeah, 986.
986. It's the 4th issue of my 5-issue run. So it's a bunch of action is happening now. High stakes, high conflict. Pick that up. I'm also writing a Spider-Man annual, Miles Morales annual that comes soon.
Really?
That might be Wednesday too.
Wow, I didn't know that was coming down the pipeline. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm doing the Spider-Man annual with Nelson Blake. And I think that actually might drop on Wednesday as well. So you might get 2 by Hill on Wednesday. I'm writing Cyberforce with Top Cow Image. That's still going on. I've got announced is this X-Men annual that will be out later this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a cyberpunk. It's like X-Men meets Ghost in the Shell is the best way I can explain it.
That sounds like a hell of a ride.
Yeah, it's cool. It's real cool. And that'll be along the way. And American Carnage, my Vertigo book, is coming this fall.
Ooh.
The first issue of that should be hitting. I'll be talking about that more on my Twitter. And then I've got a couple other things that I can't talk about in comics, but I just got done being part of the first season of Titans.
Oh, man.
That DCU streaming show. And so I think that premieres in October or something like that. I'm not sure when they announce it.
Sometime this fall, as far as I'm aware.
Sometime this fall, yeah. And then other things, man. Like I'm like the Tommy Lee Jones of storytelling, where if I have the time, I'll do the job,
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm gonna be in this movie. I'm gonna be in this movie. I'm gonna be in this movie.
That's what creatives got to do, man. Creatives got to create, and that means you're doing your job.
Yeah, it's I'm doing a Kiss thing. I don't want Dynamite to get mad at me. I am writing a Kiss series for Dynamite that should be really crazy and cool. It's set in the 70s. It's got like 70s occultism meets rock and roll. Don't forget that. I like storytelling. When you spend such a long time on the road to being a professional storyteller, and then you get a platform where people will actually hire you to tell stories, you just keep doing it. But luckily, everything that I've worked on, it's all stuff that I care about. I never feel like, I gotta work on this. No, it's everything is able to vehicle different parts of my imagination. So I'm really grateful about that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's something for us as fans to be thankful for, because by you being able to write things that are, in some ways dear, or in some ways, I guess, relative to your thought process, we get good content out of it, and you get to write something you're proud of.
Well, I think I told this story on Scott's thing too, but when I was in Asia working on this, I wrote a Muay Thai animated feature that's out there. It hasn't come to the States yet,
Yeah.
but it'll be out, I think, maybe like this year or something.
Wow, that sounds interesting.
Yeah, it was cool, man. And I was in Asia working on a thing with the producers and the whole animation team. And on a day off, I went to a bookstore just to kind of see what was there. And I saw a trade paperback of this book, Postal, that I wrote for about 2 years over with Image, Top Cow. And it's like, wow, I'm in Asia right now. And that's my book, right? And you just get struck with how wide this work goes. And I felt like, okay, well, I need to be very responsible about the work that I'm doing because it is going to be everywhere and people are going to spend their money on it. So they should get a story of value. And you just got to get humbled by the whole thing. You know, I mean, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, man. Like, you know, a kid grows up in St. Louis, Missouri, and you got a book in Thailand. You know, you're like, okay, that's a journey. That's a trip, right?
Yeah,
that's a little bit of a path.
That must be a starstruck moment.
Right? So I just take the work very serious. I don't take myself seriously. I'm a fool. But I take the work seriously.
A little bit harsh.
Well, you know, I just whatever. Like, you know, I believe in taking the work seriously and not taking yourself that seriously, you know? But if anyone's going to spend their hard-earned money on something that I've written, I want to make sure I feel like the book is worth the cover price, right? That they're getting value out of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that us as fans and as readers and consumers of media appreciate that more than anything. When someone who produces some form of art or some form of literature understands that not only are you creating art, you're creating a product for people to consume, and it's something that you obviously want your readers or your consumers to enjoy. So, I mean, it's good on you. I think, you know, that's something that's big in, you know, a couple of the bigger writers in comics right now, like you and Scott. You're very conscious that, yes, there are in fact people reading what I'm putting out, and it's just as important that the fans like what you're writing as you are satisfied with what you're writing.
Yeah, well, you know, it's impossible to please everybody all the time, and you can let the chorus, like the cacophony of opinion, stop you from taking any sort of creative step. But I do pay attention to what people are saying, not just about my work, but like work in general, right? And you know, it's sort of like different projects do different things. So if I'm working on like American Carnage, that's my original Vertigo project. It's about really kind of challenging, stark, difficult stuff, you know, but I'm selling you that from the beginning.
Right.
I'm not promising you something that's going to give you a superhero moment or this or that or whatever. It's like, this is my original thing. So it might not be for everybody. I'd like everyone to read it. But if you don't want to see the violence and the ugliness of the whole, I get it. When I'm doing a Batman story, well, you know, it's for people who read Batman. Right. So if you're reading Detective Comics, and you know, I know that people have followed Tynian's work for a very long time, and the new kid shows up. I think it's important for the work to at least respect what's gone before and the great work that James has done. Right. And provide the best experience I can for readers of Detective, you know, using kind of the prism of my truth. But there comes a point where if I have to choose between a choice that I think makes this story a better experience for a reader, or a choice that gives me catharsis, but might not make the experience better, I have to always go with the reader on that kind of thing. You know, if I were to do like a Black Label book or something a bit more bespoke with a superhero, then I'll probably, you know, make a bunch of left turns and sort of like take the object of the story and turn it upside down and spin it around and see what we have. And
deconstruct it and Watchmen everything.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a little bit. Like by nature, I'm more of a constructionist. I think that's how I think.
Yeah.
So deconstruction doesn't come naturally for me. I like exploration, but not necessarily deconstruction. But yeah, you know, when you're talking about like a monthly book and your books are double shipping and all that, and people have a book on their pull lists and the rest of it, I am cognizant of not sort of taking them down a path that I just want to see happen.
Yeah.
That they might not appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, before we go too far on that, one thing I find ironic is that, you know, in our conversation previous to going live, you had said that you're more of an anti-authoritarian mind.
I am.
But you're also a constructionist. I feel like there's a sense of irony and juxtaposition there.
There is a bit, you know. I'm turning the lights on here because it's getting a little dark in the room, so colored lights are going. Yeah, well, I'm a mythologist before anything else, right? And I writing for me is the same as campfire stories in the first villages we ever had, right? Writing is about explaining how we deal with evil, with the darkness, with winter, all those things that terrified us, you know, as we started developing as people. So my first and kind of only guiding light is the way mythology operates in the world and what myth can mean for people.
Right.
So I think about that, the role of mythology, much more than I think about anything else. Now, my anti-authoritarian streak, I think honestly that just comes from living a long time and sort of seeing the world continually failed by people who have been given power.
Right.
You know,
yeah.
Right?
I mean, I get where you're coming from.
So yeah, philosophically, that's certainly an element of it for sure. But I am always in service of mythology. You know, right. Stories were really important for me growing up, and I know that that's not a unique phenomenon. Stories were important for everybody growing up.
I think too, putting the concept of story and theology or mythology into one boat. I mean, theoretically, religion is storytelling because, you know, you can have faith in stories and you can have, you know, suspension of disbelief in others, which are two objectively different things. But ultimately, what you're writing right now in terms of superhero comic books, right? They're essentially the pantheon of American myth, right? They're our equivalent to modern Greek mythology. And I think that whether or not somebody believes these characters are real, that they exist in a theological sense, it has a lot of impact on how people can think and act and feel and understand the things around them. Because oftentimes, you know, the purpose of storytelling is to reframe things, right? And to get people to understand, or at least to acknowledge potentially different points of view, or flip the switch on how they see on how they form their opinions on other things.
Well, you know, you touched on something pretty important, I think. So as society has become more secular, and I think inarguably we can say society has become more secular, right? That tends to be consistent if you were to do it. I mean, I don't know, like I'm sure someone on YouTube right now is Googling something that's making a fool out of me, but I'm going to keep going in this direction. So as society gets more secular, stories start to take some of the place of religion. And I think people aren't always aware that they've moved stories into that place in their heart and their mind, right? So if you take Star Wars, for instance, you know, Star Wars has creation myth. It has a system of ethics.
Right.
It has near sacred texts in a way, right? If we're going to kind of play with the word sacred.
Right. Yeah. It's all in context.
You know, it's got a pilgrimage because they have their own celebration that happens every year. So the true Star Wars fan, the true believer, will make the journey to go to the place and do the thing. So a lot of those things in a broad sense, in a macro sense, are sort of checking off the boxes that religion, you know, used to solely occupy without any other people in that room.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of the passion comes from the fan base. I think that's where a a lot of people really feel injured when their characters aren't being treated in the ways that they would want them to be treated.
Right.
When the tenets are broken, when people blaspheme, right?
Yeah.
Because it's when you look at like a lot of the chatter online, it's a lot of the same verbiage that people would use about blasphemy, right? Like you're doing this, you're doing that, and that is blasphemy against what we know to be true and sacred about these characters.
Right.
So stories do serve that function, and we're not really in a culture anymore that values philosophy as a pursuit.
Yeah.
Like most kids in high school will get no philosophy, right? Just won't be introduced to it.
Yeah.
And then you go to college, you might get some, but you might not get, it depends on what courses you take and from which direction it comes and, all of that. But then in the real world, there's no real inherent value of it. Like, you don't, no one asks you in a job interview what your thoughts are about Aristotle.
Right.
How do you feel about Plato? How do you feel about the nature of the Republic? No one ever asks that, right?
No.
So there's this inherent kind of impracticality stapled to philosophy. Now, I think philosophy is really important because an exploration of philosophy will help you develop your own system of ethics.
Right. And I think coattailing on that, sorry to interrupt, is also that by definition, right, the philosophy is the love of knowledge, right? So just for one to be more knowledgeable opens up the boundaries of perception and allows people to understand things that they might normally, or that they might not have normally, and B, to see the platforms or the perspectives at which other people are speaking from, whether or not you agree or not, can be irrelevant, but understanding them and seeing where they're coming from without demonizing it, like it.
And that's why I think stories matter so much now, because stories are really the only place where people are going to regularly engage with philosophy, with ethics.
Right.
We can't expect that in the same way we could before. So, stories do matter, and they matter a great deal, because those are the places where we explore these things, and paying attention to the importance of that is something I do often. Now, I'm not saying every writer needs to think about the effect of write whatever you want to write, create whatever you want to create, right? I got no rules for people. But that's what I think about. I think about, well, what am I saying here?
Right.
What am I telling the reader is evil, is good? What kind of just life am I suggesting a person live? And how do I think through those things and put those things in a narrative?
Right. I think at the same time, too, as much as modern day society has kind of slowly stripped the value of philosophy in, I guess, a wider context, it in some ways puts creators like you on a higher pedestal because you are the ones on almost the sole carriers of that flame. You are the ones introducing some people to different forms of ethics, right?
Well, I'll tell you what, if someone puts me on a pedestal, they're in big trouble. There's Stephen King's and like Frank Miller's and all those people. Don't put me on a pedestal. But I do hear what you're saying. Yes, what it does do is it puts into stark relief the potential impact of what you're doing. I mean, that's why I deeply regulate my behavior in social media. Not that I have to, because I don't have a lot of like negative impulses. I'm just not wired that way.
Yeah, you're like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of social media.
Well, I mean, I grew up in Missouri, man, and you don't make it through Missouri by only living in like a bubble of people who think what you think.
Right.
Because, I grew up in a neighborhood where I had an Orthodox Jewish family across the street. There was a black family next door. There was a super Republican white family. There was a Republican black family down the street. It's what it was. So I just got used to finding common ground.
Right.
And not demonizing people instantly because of, well, you don't think exactly what I think all the time, so I got to come in. And I try to carry that over into all my discourse. And the other part of it is when we interact with people online,
Mhm.
we are real people interacting with other people's avatars.
Right.
And it's very important to remember.
Right. Yeah.
You might be dealing with someone who is intentionally making themselves out to be the most argumentative and provocative version of who they really are.
Mm.
And you don't know why, right? So they could be going through anything, man. You know,
Yeah.
like if someone, because I get negative tweets and I guess people will call them offensive tweets at me all the time. I mean, you do when you're on Twitter, it's gonna happen.
Especially being a creative, there's always someone who's going to get.
Yeah, like someone can turn me into a pinata. But what I remember is I don't know what's going on in this person's life right now.
Right.
Like they might be going through some things, and I don't need to pile on or respond or make a bad situation worse with that kind of interaction. And then simultaneously, it would really bother me if someone bought a book of mine, read it, liked it, and then found me online and, for some kind of unrelated reason, like a show they watched, music they listen to, a person they follow, whatever, they saw me like railing against it in such a hyperbolic way that it felt like this person whose work they read and enjoyed automatically has written them off as a human being.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to do that to somebody because, I couldn't think of a more kind of, for a person that went to the library regularly because he couldn't afford buying a lot of books, who reread books because he couldn't afford to buy new ones.
Right.
If I were to look up someone and be like, oh, wait a minute, they told her this other reason, that would kind of hurt. So I just try to, be as positive as I can, about things. And if someone disagrees with me politically or something, I'm not that political, but if someone disagrees with me, I'm patient with it, and I'll discuss anything with anybody as long as it doesn't get to like the personal insults and all of that. I don't give that any time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that, not only on a social level, but on a personal level. Being able to interact with somebody with opposing views or opposing philosophies, ethics, all of such things are in one sphere is valuable to learn and to grow as a person. Being able to converse and understand, like I said, being able to converse and understand different viewpoints that differ from your own is valuable. And I think that'll help you in some way, in any facet of your life, whether.
Well, for sure, because your ethics don't exist until they're tested,
Right.
Ethics that exist only in a bubble are worthless.
Right.
So in order to test the mettle of your ethics, you need to introduce them to opposing ideas and viewpoints, because you'll realize, okay, I either you will remain unchanged, or you will learn a thing and be like, okay, let me adjust this because I hadn't thought about the potential negative effect of what I believe is a morally just action, right? Because I'd never considered the negative effect of it. But then you start to think about the negative effect of it, and you're like, oh, wait a minute. Well, maybe there's a way I can balance this out a little bit, where I can do the most good while doing less harm or something. Like, it's, unless your system of ethics is fragile, you won't be injured by an opposing viewpoint.
Right.
Like you've got to be, I think, open to having a conversation with people who do not think the way you do, because if we don't do that, then everyone winds up in little echo chambers.
Right.
And we have a multifurcated society of just people in little packs. No one's listening to each other, and that's not a great place to live.
Right. I think too that intersects from what I've read of your work in your writing, right? Especially with your current work on detective. You know what I mean? So for those of you listening who haven't been super up to date on his work on detective right now, A, you should be picking it up because it's fantastic.
You should be picking it up.
B, the greatest Batman stories, the greatest stories of heroics are the ones in which the hero is challenged, right, on a mental and emotional way. And I think that what the conversation we were just talking about in the fragility of ethics, and B, I guess mostly the fragility of ethics is carried through in this run, right? Because we have the villain Karma, who essentially I mean, he can read Batman's mind. He has a device to read people's minds, and ultimately that is a storytelling device used to explore the doubts that Batman carries in his crusade. As convicted as he is in doing what he does, obviously there are doubts to be had, and the ultimate goal of this villain, for those again who haven't been reading or keeping up with it, is to challenge Batman's concept of his family, because the villain ultimately believes that Batman is a far more effective engine of I guess justice when he derives his power from fear and from anger and from brutality. And ultimately, that's what created this villain, right? Batman's anger and his fear and his brutality is what caused Karma, this ultimately delusional character, yes, to wreak havoc on Gotham and to wreak havoc on Batman emotionally.
Well, that's, Karma's whole thing, in this arc is when you are broken and defeated by someone, you find ways to justify it.
Right.
And so Karma has found his justification in the belief that what broke him was this legendary vigilante hero that was majestic and almost inexorable on human terms. That's how it makes sense to him.
Right.
That's what defeated me.
The gargoyle atop the Dark Tower, yeah.
The gargoyle in the Dark Tower, right? So when Karma discovers that this gargoyle in the Dark Tower has now gathered a bunch of young people with various levels of training, to kind of represent him, he sees the Bat influence in Gotham kind of a bit like a brand or like almost like a franchise, right? Kind of go back to like Batman Incorporated and those thoughts. Karma's like, no. I cannot have, I couldn't be broken by that. Right. I won't let you be that, right? You have to be more than that to justify what I went through. And, that's what kind of motivates him to come into Gotham and to kind of ramp that up, because he needs it to be a legend that defeated him. He doesn't need it to be a man with compassion and friends and family. Like, no. I need you to be this thing that was unique and powerful and inexorable. Otherwise, there is something less about me, and I refuse to accept that.
And his pursuit is ultimately selfish. And I think whether or not people want to admit it, it's incredibly relatable. If you are, for example, partaking in some sort of competitive sport, say you're in a boxing match, right? If you lose to someone, you want to know that you lost to the best.
The best.
Right. And so I think that partially is something that most of us can relate to on a personal level, because we've all lost at some point in our lives, whether or not we want to admit it. And we've all probably lost to somebody that we don't want to and never did want to admit that, we might have thought lower of them. You know what I mean?
For sure.
And I think that, that's kind of something like an accolade to put under your belt, because to do something with a character like this who's existed for, nearly 80 years now, and twist it and make obviously something something that's been escalated to the pedestal of an American god or an American myth, right, is what makes him appealing, right? The reason Batman,
we make gods of our enemies because that buoys our power, right? You never hear someone complaining, this person is responsible for the greatest pain in my life, and they also have no power and agency.
Right.
No one ever says that, right? Everyone, this person that I don't like is responsible for these things, and they have all of this power, and they're wielding it, and it's because we need our enemies to be majestic, because that majesty is reflected back onto us. If our enemies are human, then we are also human. And we don't want to deal with that. So,
or even less so.
Even less so, right? So, Karma is in a philosophical sense, he's a solipsist. Right. He can't see the world outside of himself.
Right.
Everything revolves around him and his feelings and his trauma. It's what it is. I thought that would be an interesting character to bring into the story, especially now with the things that Bruce has gone through in Tom's run,
right,
and all of that. And I don't address it directly, but it's like the subtext is there, right?
It's there. It's underlying for sure.
So some of those, Bruce kind of leaning towards isolation once again is certainly influenced by, the events happening in the Batman title and all of that. So I try to, I don't know, those things are, I find them interesting and I try to engage them in different ways because I think we can run into those pitfalls with the way that we operate in society. And I was talking about social media today a little bit about how I'm not sure if it's net positive or net negative, but one of the most potentially, capital P, potentially damaging things about social media is it requires us to think about ourselves
too
much.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. We become far too self-aware.
Super self-aware, and we start thinking about communication in terms of what it represents for me, what it could do for my popularity, how much my outreach could be. And we're taught to speak, but not how to listen.
Right.
And that can create problems. It can also create a lot of depression.
Right.
Because it's the dichotomy, right? I mean, Bruce Wayne's dichotomy is he is both a man and something monstrous simultaneously.
Right.
And how does he reconcile with all of that? Well, in Bruce's case, he's a billionaire, so his life always has a measure of majesty, right? And so he never has to report to the shift manager right? He's never had those experiences, right? I worked at a video store, a video rental store for a while. He's never really done that, right? So Bruce is, for everything he's put himself through, all of it has been epic.
And
his entire life has been a life of the epic.
All of it has solely been his choice too. He hasn't been faced with that mundane sense of the real world by force.
I mean, outside of the tragedy of his parents.
Yeah.
But I always talk about Bruce Wayne a lot. Is Bruce Wayne is what happens when a traumatized child never has to hear the word no.
Right.
And he had the resources to not hear the word no. And I'm not maligning him as a character because I think he's really interesting because of that and all that. Right. But in our lives, we generally aren't billionaires.
Right.
So, you have a Twitter feed and you got thousands of followers. You have a YouTube and you got thousands of subscribers and whatever it is. And you're being quoted on various YouTubes and quoted on various Twitter feeds. And you're sort of this thing. But simultaneously, you also got to buy yourself milk. Right. You also got to pay bills. And so you're living in this weird dissonant place where in this one sphere, you have power and influence. But then when you get to the quote unquote real world, outside of the matrix, so to speak, you're confronted with the same vagaries and, the daily misfortunes that we all kind of do. And it can create a dissonance in your mind, in your spirit. And that can really get people down. So karma is what happens. Karma, the character, not karma, the idea. Karma, the character, is what happens when you decide to see the world entirely through a prism of your own needs and desires.
Right. And I think that's true of both Bruce and Karma in the story. Yeah. Heavily so. I mean, the part of what makes the story arc interesting and the villain Karma in particular is because he challenges that with the ground at which Bruce Wayne stands upon, right? So he's having to deal with things and that he doesn't often deal with, right? Him being Bruce Wayne as Batman is ultimately this engine of motivation and this engine of undying willpower. And when you challenge the very things that make that engine run, it's interesting. Because we don't often see that, right? We have plenty of villains that challenge Bruce Wayne on a number of different levels, whether it be intellectually or physically. But when you can challenge the character on an emotional level, right? Mm-hmm. And by all means, Batman's my favorite fictional character of all time, but he's an emotionally stunted human being, to say the least.
he's in this noble state of permanent adolescence.
Right.
Batman is this interesting combination of Achilles and Odysseus.
Right.
He has the kind of global travel, return home to bring justice quality that Odysseus has.
Right.
But he also has that adolescent rage that Achilles has. Right. So he's like this kind of amalgam of these two mythological figures. And part of what makes him so effective is that rage, is that adolescence. Right. That's the candle flame. Because we mellow as we get older. I mean, I'm, certainly more mellow now than I was when I was like 16 or 17, right?
Right.
And Bruce is able to protect that candle flame of that fury, that passion, where most of us eventually kind of runs out of us, and we start to get more measured. But it also puts him in a certain mind state. Like I taught substitute taught a little bit in New York, just because you need a job, and that was a job I could get.
Right.
And teenagers are awesome, and also all megalomaniacs.
That's certainly a way to put it. Yeah.
Right. You know what I mean? Like in kind of an awesome way, but there is nothing outside of the perspective of a 16-year-old. Like the entire world revolves around how they feel that day, and so, so yeah, like those kinds of things, inform some of the choices I make and some of the ideas I wrestle with.
Right. I mean, it's entire. I mean, your ultimately interesting stories are the ones that deal with the human condition, and that can be a number of different things, but the facet in which it deals with emotion, right, is fundamentally something that everybody deals with in different ways, and here we're exploring, this construct that is Bruce Wayne, and this character that we know him to be, kind of dealing with in a much more emphasized way conflicts that most of us deal with on a personal level.
Well, and so for people out there that are watching or listening, and they're thinking about writing, or they want to create art in some way, that's a big part of it, is using everything. So I tell people all the time, an artist cannot afford to feel a thing and not use the feeling.
Yeah.
Right? You have to use it. And people ask, well, how do you get a career started, or how do you stick with it, or how do you go through all these things and still manage to create things? And my answer is always the same. I tell them, because everything I felt I used.
Right.
So when I was depressed, I used it and put it in the story. When I was scared, I used it and put it in the story. When I wanted to quit, I'd write a story about wanting to quit.
Right.
And it would always funnel back into the work. And
no, I'm sorry. And that's what draws people in, is seeing things through these different forms of media that we also see in ourselves, and seeing how other people can either resolve those feelings of frustration or difficult emotions, or let it all kind of fester and build up until there's no other way out besides reacting,
and like I was recently rewatching Dark Knight Rises, and I know people have some feelings about the film one way or another. It might have my favorite moment in all of the Nolan films,
really,
because he has to climb out of that hole, right?
Yeah,
and you get to see him fail,
right?
But he still finds a way to do it. And the guy's like, well, the reason why you're failing is you got this rope, man. You're giving yourself an option. In your mind, that if you don't get that next grip, you won't die. And that's why you can't climb out of the hole.
It's a sense of urgency.
And so, that idea, that concept, that kind of pragmatic life philosophy, that's what kept me going.
Right.
I didn't have a safety net. I didn't have a good day job while I was writing. I had terrible day jobs while I was writing. I didn't have the fallback plan or whatever, because when you have the rope, you have the rope, and you just won't climb as hard. Or at least that's not how I work. So when I saw that scene in Dark Knight Rises, I'm like, yep, I understand everything about that.
Yeah, on a fundamental
level. You have to take
level.
the rope off, make the jump. We got to put it all on the line. You got to make the jump or perish. And if you can get to that point, then I think you can forge a career for yourself, no matter what it is. It could be law, medicine, whatever it is. And that's the power of stories. That's what a story can do for us.
Right. So my question to you for aspiring writers, how would you advise them to learn to cope with the fact that there isn't necessarily a rope for them to pull? How, like, I guess most people's first instinct is to falter under pressure, right? Sure. So what would your advice be to aspiring writers to find a way for them to rise above that form of pressure?
Well, the most important thing to remember is that you only fail when you quit.
Right.
If you don't quit, then failure is just learning experience on the way to success. And I know that sounds like, some useless aphorism, but in practice, it's good to remember, right? Like, you control failure because you control when you quit.
Right.
So not failing, you're learning. And if you're learning, you're getting better. So it's the first thing. It's almost to change that perspective on things, right?
Right.
And just a couple more. Make your vision of yourself, of your future, as specific as possible. See, a lot of times we have these ideas. We have ambitions. I want to be a thing, right?
Right.
I want to be a writer, or I want to be a filmmaker, or entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. But we haven't made it specific. And so it's just this like nebulous cloud of emotional result that lives in our and that feels super far away.
Right.
But if you say, well, I want to write these specific characters, this specific company, while I'm working on this specific original story that will reach this specific audience. See, now there's so much concrete in that imagination, right? And that can inform the choices you make, because you can say, is this choice leading me to the place I want to go, or is it not? Like, if you just say, I want to go to a happy place, well, you could be walking forever. If you say, I want to go to Athens, then every choice you're making that doesn't lead you to Athens, stop making.
Right.
And then you can narrow that thing down. And I think the specificity of that is really important. And building in your imagination a vision of yourself after you've achieved what you want to achieve helps.
Yeah.
The difference between imagination and memory for the subconscious mind is barely there, right? Like, for the conscious mind, we know. But, everyone's always heard about the study where the basketball players, a couple of them were shooting free throws in the gym for a couple hours, and a couple other guys were just thinking about sinking free throws somewhere else for a couple hours, and they got back out there, and, the thinking guys were either as good or a little better than the guys who are actually physically shooting, because the mind can't differentiate, subconscious mind. So you want to combat the fear of failure with a very specific vision of success.
Right.
And the most concrete thing in your mind will win every time.
Yeah. If I'm not mistaken, what you're getting at is that the destination informs the journey. Right. Absolutely.
Like, when two things live in your mind, right? Because usually our fears are pretty undefined.
Right.
They're just kind of like, I don't want to fail, and whatever fail means, or I don't want to lose, whatever lose means.
Yeah.
But we rarely invest it with detail, but it feels very powerful because it's tied into like our nascent selves, the survival of our dreams and hopes, or even, the comfort of our lives and all that. So it's there. If you try to pit a broad, general, amorphous vision of success against fear, well, fear is going to win. Right. So what you have to do is make this very specific, and then you can say, well, wait a minute. Well, what happens if I don't? Right. Or who can actually stop me from doing it? Or and then you start to like almost apply like a Socratic kind of analysis to to success and failure, and things get a little more clear, right? So you definitely want to keep concrete visions of your success in your mind, because the most concrete thing in your mind is always going to win.
Yeah, and yeah, I think too. With that being said, it having a concrete idea or a concrete vision of where you're going renders something like a construct of like fear or a want, or I guess, like fear, for example. It renders that to kind of like this realm of ambiguity. Whereas now you have this path that you can walk, or you have this little cobblestone way where you might fall off. So it's at that point, obviously, you're going to want to walk the clear. You're going to want to walk the yellow brick road. You know?
I'll tell you a story real quick. So when I was in high school, I was studying Taekwondo, and mainly I was doing it because I didn't want to play football anymore, and I needed to do a sport for the way my high school worked. So martial arts would allow me to get out of having to play football.
Right.
So studying Taekwondo, I was at like a green belt level, but I was pretty good for a green belt, and I needed to belt test and the rest of it. I avoided belt testing because in order to belt test, I had to spar the black belt in our class, right? And he was mean, just a mean guy. Just not a nice guy. Some people just not nice guys. Him, not a nice guy. And his girlfriend was also a student in the class, and I was friendly with her, but like just friendly, whatever. But he didn't like me most of all, right? Like of all the people he didn't like, I was the one he really didn't like me.
This sounds like a coming of age story.
I knew I would have to spar this guy, and he wasn't like Johnny from like Cobra Kai, but he was just kind of just like a jerk. And I was afraid because he was much better than me, and I just really didn't, and that's why I didn't continue to test, because I knew that in order to test on a green belt, I'd fight this guy, and I don't know what I was waiting for, man. Maybe I was waiting for this guy to like leave or something, but so was gonna do it. So my Kwan Young Nim, who that's what we called our teacher in the Taekwondo school. It's similar to the Chinese Sifu or the Japanese sensei. So Kwan Young Nim, he sat down with me and he's like, okay, you're afraid of fighting this guy, and I know he's got some issues, but one, he's not going to kill you, and you need to just believe in that,
right?
Because once you remove death from the equation, it's not that bad, is it?
Everything becomes much more bearable,
right? And then he also told me, just sit and meditate and imagine sparring him. And while you're imagining the sparring session, imagine him hitting you, it hurting, but you continue. And make sure that's part of it. And so I did, right? So for like 3 weeks, I would just meditate on that, for like an hour or something a day. And not an hour a day, probably like 20 minutes a day. And while I was just getting ready to do my belt test and the rest of it. So by the time I had to spar this guy, because Kwan Young Nim wanted me to take the test. He's like, you've been a green belt too long. You got to, come on, man. As in Scott Snyder terms, he was like, you need to travel the cursed wheel. So, so Kwan Young Nim wanted me to travel the cursed wheel. So I was like, okay. So 4 weeks later, I spar this guy, and the guy isn't going like full speed or anything because he's a black belt and I'm a green belt. And it wasn't about if he could beat me. It was about testing some of my technique, my spacing, my footwork, my balance, all that stuff, how I would handle pressure, like those kind of things. And in the course of that spar, he got a good shot in. He got a good like right there to like kind of like right around here where the breath is.
Right.
And it didn't hurt as much as it kind of just took the wind out for a second.
Right.
But because I had imagined going through something like that for those 3 weeks,
it was far more bearable.
It was bearable because I had a psychological plan in place. It wasn't like, oh, this is something I'd never even experienced. Oh no, I had a plan in place. So I was able to kind of go through the spar and make it and belt way up, and then so I kept on studying. But that's just an example of making it specific. Kind of living through your success and failure in your mind's eye. So when resistance comes and adversity comes, you're not just like caught on your heels because you've already thought about how you would handle it. And I guess that's a very Bruce Wayne thing to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing. It's
now my panties are showing, right?
Yes.
But yeah, you know, my wife makes fun of me because she's like, you realize that you think like Batman, right?
That's almost the ultimate compliment. I mean, if a woman ever said that to me, I'd go buy a ring then and there. So
you would think it was a compliment until you saw the look on her face when she said it, and then you realize that it wasn't really a compliment. But yeah, like I approach, yeah, that's how I approach things. I mean, I remember I was reading Nightfall when I was a kid, and there's an issue of it. And I guess it was Batman. I think Chuck Dixon wrote it.
Yep.
And so there's a part where Batman was on this rooftop, and he was super exhausted. And back in like the early 90s, you knew Batman was tired because he would have like stubble.
Yep. Yeah.
The universal visual grammar for tired Batman was, you know, I haven't had time to shave, right? So you would have, so he had a little stubble, and he just fought some guy on the roof. I forget which villain it was, but you know, Bane had let all the villains out of Arkham, and they were
right.
And he sits down, like leans against this chimney, and I believe this was Chuck Dixon writing this issue, and there was a caption, and he says, you know, something about I'm really tired or whatever. And then he says, I focus into the pain and through it.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that when I was a kid. Okay. Well, that seems like a thing to do. And I would just like take that into football practice. Mm-hmm. You know, I would take that into whatever I was doing, or, you know, it's just that little nugget of I guess, pathos that I got out of a Batman comic was something I would hold on to, you know, right. Focus into the pain and through it, right? Don't ignore the pain, go right into the center of it and move through it, push past it.
Right.
So those things, you know, that's what you have to do, I think, when you're trying to forge an uncommon life. Right. Do something that most people won't be able to do. You can achieve it. Anyone listening to this or watching this can achieve whatever they want, but you just have to put yourself in the mindset. Don't give yourself the comfort of too much safety.
Right.
And like about the vision yourself, so you can acquire it. Like if you dream of I don't know what your favorite thing is, right? But let's say you have this YouTube setup.
Right.
And there's this YouTube setup, and you know you want it. You know, you got your IKEA desk and your other thing and your other thing with the thing, whatever the YouTube thing is, right? And you know, now it costs like $8,000 to make this setup, right? With the webcam and the whole. There's got to be something on that setup that you can just impulse buy right now, right?
Right.
If you made it really specific, and maybe you just go get that plant. I'm going to get that fake plant that MKBHD always has on his desk. I'm going to get that plant, man. I'm going to go to IKEA, and I'm going to get that plant. Will you go get your plant, and you put that plant on your desk? Because if you put that plant on your desk, you've already taken a step towards that setup, right?
Right.
Like, and we don't, as a society, you know, support that kind of thinking, that kind of an investment, that personal psychological investment into your future. But it's, you know, I know I'm prattling on. I'll give you one more quick story since we're talking about the inspiring people, because that gets me hype.
Right.
So when I was a kid, parents of a friend of mine had a BMW 850, right? It was the wedge BMW 860 evil, right? It was just like on the street, flip up light, right? This was the best car in the world.
Yeah.
Awesome car in the world. So I made a promise to that my first car, the first car that I bought, would be this car. Now, I could not afford this car. Right. I couldn't afford it in high school. I could not afford it in college. I could not afford it after college, right?
Yeah.
I did not get a driver's license because I had to keep my promise, right? I did not get another car because I had to keep my promise. And as soon as I got done with the first season of Titans, I was like, you know what? I think I can buy my car. So I started looking for it, and I found a seller kind of up north. I'm in LA, so I found a seller a little bit up the coastline. And I bought my damn car, man. And I kept that promise to myself. And I did not allow myself to get any other shitty car. Sorry, I said shitty. Any other crappy car.
That's fine. Don't worry
on the road to getting what I wanted, because I wasn't going to break the promise. Because I believed I would be able to get this car. Now, my brother, I might only have this car for 2 weeks. I don't care. That's not the point.
But you got it. You got it,
right? Like I might be like, you know what? Uber and Lyft is easier. I don't want to worry about parking. This is kind of a pain in the ass. I'm going to go ahead and put this up. But I was able to keep the promise. And so that's what I would tell people to do. Like, set kind of crazy goals for yourself. Also set doable goals for yourself and hold yourself accountable for all of it.
Right. I think you just informed the scope of the rest of my life.
Oh man, I apologize for my like Jordan Peterson moment.
No. I mean, there's a lot of value in what you.
Well, you know, you have to set these goals for yourself. You have to set the goals.
No, I mean it informs us in a multiple set of levels. You know, whether or not we want to be a writer, the results and the journey that you took in those different situations are applicable to pretty much anything in our lives. And I think it's valuable not only as people who are aspiring to write or be creatives, but people who are aspired to do anything that's challenging.
Totally.
And there's a lot of value in that. So, you know, don't apologize in any way. I mean, whether or not, like what we're getting across, what you got across there is something that I think a number of people, including myself and the people in the chat, now have kind of come to grips with concepts of, I guess, the pursuit of success, the pursuit of an end goal.
See, I mean, I'm not special, you know, like I'm probably pretty smart. But I have never taken an IQ test. I don't know. My reading comprehension is pretty good, and I'm fairly articulate. So maybe I have like, you know, some kind of leg up there. But I also, you know, just had to struggle a long time to do what I wanted to do. And it's really important to me that if I represent anything, I want to represent the possibility of anybody to do something less ordinary, even if the initial hand that they're dealt doesn't add up to that.
Right.
You know, I was a kid, I had a single parent home, and my dad died when I was a kid. It was just me and my mom. And I'm in St. Louis, Missouri, you know, and you've got all these things like, you know, I literally was everything that like Stefan Molyneux says will result in criminal.
Oh, no.
So like everything that he says will result in criminal, that was me, right? I had every single box checked. But you know, I did have a good support system. You know, my family support system was pretty good, and I also had a scholarship to like a pretty good school, so that did, you know, help me out a little bit. But yeah, like it's really important to me that people feel like they can achieve and feel like they can do a thing and get out here and chase those dreams, because the only thing that you can't really defeat is regret, right? Like regret is the thing you want to avoid at all costs. Right. Like I wouldn't avoid anger, you know, I certainly wouldn't avoid fear. And you know, all those things are things that are useful and other. Regret isn't useful in any way. Right. Regret just takes. And so live a life where where you're making choices that to the best of your ability will prevent regret. Right. Because regret is what wounds you and makes you bitter and angry. You know, regret is the fertile ground for jealousy, right? And regret is the first step of shame, and shame can ruin lives. So make the choices that will prevent you from regretting a thing. You know, even if you decide it's totally cool to write half a novel and realize you don't want to be a writer, there's nothing wrong with that. Do that. You know, like you got to. I worked in advertising out of film school because I thought for a second I might want to be in advertising. I worked in it for a bit, realized, oh, this isn't for me. You know, and then stepped aside. Like, it's okay to change course, but you know, it's not okay not to walk a path.
Right, and it's not okay to be afraid of that.
Yeah, like if fear is, you know, if fear has its purpose, recognize it. Make sure that your life isn't at stake. Take precautions so that you won't die, and then put fear away.
Yeah, that and with everything being said, that I've seen intersects in what you're doing in Detective. That's what Bruce is going through right now with Karma, right?
Totally.
The level of regret and the self-doubt and the cloud that comes over you when the difficult choices have to be made. And
sure.
That, I mean, and that's what makes the story good. Like, damn, man.
Well, thank you. Like, well, it's like the end of the last issue that was released. At least came out not this last Wednesday, but the Wednesday before. You know, Bruce says in captions, you know, I'm afraid he might be right, talking about karma, right? But it's the recognition of that. Like, Bruce has to say, okay, I need to be strong enough to recognize that I am afraid he might be right, so that I can continue on and make sure that he's not, right? That's the unspoken part of the caption. That's why it ends with the bat flying through the window. It's almost like a, you know, it's a bit of a vision. Like, did it really happen? Is it happening in Bruce's mind? We don't know. But what it really is almost like a mythical reward for Bruce turning that philosophical corner, right? It's like you have now, you've stopped pretending that this man cannot injure you because he can.
Right.
And because you're honest about that, we will reward you with shattered window bat inspiration. Right? Like,
right.
And that, honestly, that's a nod to the Frank Miller. You know, it's the Dark Knight Returns when he's taking the shower and the voice of the bat is like, you can't hide from me. You are puny. You are small. You know, like, I am you. And all of that. He doesn't even remember shaving off his mustache, right? Like, it's this, you know, this need for truth, because if you have power without truth, then you will become a villain,
and ultimately the power will falter.
Absolutely. You have to have truth in tandem with power, and it's not just speaking truth to power. Power must also be humble to truth,
and that kind of flicks something on in my head, where the moment that Bruce, or the situation that Bruce is in right now, emotionally is almost similar to the situation in year one, right? Where Bruce goes out and he's completely unprepared to tackle Gotham and to tackle the criminal underbody of the city.
For sure. Frank Miller is a huge influence on me. Like, you know, when DC contacted me about writing 5 issues of Detective, I knew already that I was going to like have a nod to Nolan here, a nod to Frank Miller over there, a little bit of the Keaton Batman. You're going to get like a Keaton Batman kind of reference in the next issue, because you don't know how many Batman stories you're going to tell. So you got to leave it all out there, man. You got to, you know, you got to put all your lyrics on the record, because that might be the record you get.
And that, sorry to interrupt briefly for a second. That makes me think of the way Scott approaches things. Scott Snyder. Whenever I watch an interview with him, one of the things that's most consistent is he says, this could be my only chance to use this character as a platform, as a voice to say and do these things. And for him specifically, and I feel like I've seen that as something consistent in your body of work, in that you have to use the things that make you afraid. And you have to. And that's what makes the characters and these stories so real, you know, as big and grandiose as they are. It makes them real to you because they're things that we struggle with. Yeah,
it just, you know, the stories pump with the lifeblood of whatever you're going through, whether you're aware of it or not. And if you're aware of it, you'll probably end up telling a better story, right?
Right.
So, you know, you can't avoid, you know, like we were talking, I think before you went live about, you know, paranoia creeping in and how I'm probably absorbing that from the world around me and reflecting it in the story. Right. Well, that's going to happen. And yeah, you want to embrace those things. I mean, Batman meant so much to me as a kid because Batman is an essay on mastering your own fear. I mean, he weaponized his own fear. He knows he's scary because he would have been terrified of what he is.
Exactly.
You know? And there's a real kind of pathway for, if not happiness, satisfaction in life. To say, I am going to stand in the center of this thing that I fear the most until I am no longer afraid of it. And now I have mastered the nature of that fear, and I can use it to protect other people from being afraid.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's why these characters endure for so long, because they are so rich and filled with nutrition.
Yeah.
That we continue to go back to them. And yeah, and if you get an opportunity to write one of these characters that means so much to so many people, then yeah, man, put all your love on it, because you just never know if you're going to get a chance to come back and do it again.
Well, and you know, credit to you and a lot of the guys putting out work like that. It takes a lot for somebody to make themselves vulnerable in their writing, but ultimately that's what makes the literature and the storytelling good. Because people,
those were the writers that I admired growing up, man. Like, you know, I would read Hills Like White Elephants by Ernest Hemingway, and a little short story, but there's so much truth in it. Like, you know, you could tell it mattered to him what happens in that story. Or, you know, Old Man in the Sea is something that I think more people have encountered.
Right.
And there's so much honesty in it. And I do think that good writing is honest writing.
Right.
And it could be, I mean, fiction is a lie in a way because it's a story. You're making up, it's fake.
Right.
But you want the foundation of the fiction to be honest. If you look at Star Wars, like A New Hope, George Lucas was that kid. Yeah. He was the kid who looked at the horizon and wanted to be more. And somebody wanted him to stick around for the next harvest. And he was like, no, I want to tell stories. And I'm scared to leave the homestead, but I got to do it. Like, he got all of those emotions. And if you look at the prequel trilogy, even though, like, dramatically, you know, people can have their thoughts about it, clearly him as a billionaire or whatever he was, he thought a lot about taxes. He thought a lot about trade federations, right? Like, these are real things for him. So, you know, if the original trilogy, Star Wars Empire and Jedi, is about the underdog dealing with the authoritarian regime,
right?
The prequel trilogy is about the just action of the powerful, because he's powerful when he's making those movies.
Right.
He was less powerful when he was making the other movies, but it's all honest to where he is. So yeah, like, you know, you want your stories to be honest,
right?
As much as possible.
And again, you know, part of what makes what you're doing right now in Detective so good is you're able to put your voice into Batman without making Batman you, right? And that's one of the things that, you know, through reviewing your books, I've found a lot of, I don't want to say not peace with, I've found kind of this affection towards what you're doing in the book, because you're able to stay true to these characters and their voices and who they've been throughout, you know, their 60, 70, 80 plus year history, while inserting concepts and inserting these constructs of life that you struggle with and using them as the lens.
Yeah, I mean, the continuity of characterization is really important to me, because you want the character to feel like the character. Now, we all have a different idea of who a character is, but you want that idea to be specific and anchor story, I think, if you're working on legacy characters, right? Like, you know, and so the voices matter, you know, to me. Like, I will act out the Batman scenes with a bed sheet if I have to, just to make sure that, you know, he's saying something that I think Batman would say, you know. And then Jim Gordon is like, you know, Batman, these madmen, it's not your fault. Of course it is, Jim. Like, yeah, like that's what he would say, right?
Oh,
like,
man. Yeah,
you know, like that. So yeah, it matters. I mean, that's the fun of it, man. It's getting in there and and kind of living through these characters and thinking about how they would respond and what feels right and what doesn't feel authentic, and go through it. And I'll go through and I'll nibble at things here and there, and try to make sure, like, oh, that's not very Batman. That's too much. He says too much there. I gotta cut that out.
Right.
And, like, he would say this, and like, he owes me his life. Like, that's what he would say to that call. Right. So yeah, like that's the fun of it for me, is inhabiting the characters. And I definitely don't want the characters to feel like, oh, this is Bryan Hill talking from his soapbox, because that's not storytelling.
Well, and no, I mean, and I don't think anybody can truly say that, because it's Bryan Hill using this character that we know and love to articulate or to put into perspective this one of the frailties of being human. And you're not taking these characters and manipulating them to what you're trying to say. You're taking what you want to say and making them something that the character can organically kind of subscribe to.
Well, if you want, I don't write stories to persuade, but for writers that do want to persuade with narratives, you don't persuade by just saying your thesis over and over again.
Yeah.
You persuade by demonstrating the justice of your thesis with the story, right? Mm-hmm. So the moment you start to pontificate, you've lost people who disagree with you, because instantly shields go up. Nobody wants to listen, and now they're mad, and they're probably going to start tweeting.
Right.
So what you want to do, if you want to persuade someone, is just the drama. Right. Let the drama of it persuade, and let the organic nature of the characters, the interactions, the choices, and the consequences, let those things illustrate your concept.
Right.
But if you just have a arm on the hip, finger pointed, and now I'm going to tell you about this thing, well, that's not going to work.
The drama is what anchors everything and allows the story or the point that you want to be told to get across.
And you got to be willing as a writer to have the reader identify with the villain. Sometimes that's gonna happen, right? Like, so if I wrote Captain America and I was writing a Captain America piece, and like the story was happening in the 40s, mm-hmm. Well, the Red Skull has to be a real character. Now, I personally disagree with the Red Skull.
Right.
But, he has to be articulated as a three-dimensional character. And you hope that by demonstrating, well, this is what the Red Skull believes, and that's how that happens. This is what Steve Rogers believes, and that's how that happens. Hopefully, most readers are on Steve Rogers' side. But you don't want to weaken or de-dimensionalize your bad guy, because you really don't want people to identify. You've got to be able to let people, I think, make up their own minds about how they feel about these things, and tell your story according to your truth. And hopefully, the emotional, the emotional effect of your ethics and practice mm-hmm. can maybe alter a perspective if persuasion is your goal. But simultaneously, I don't think that persuasion must be a goal of a story either. I don't want people to take that, because I don't really persuade in my stories, I don't think.
Right. You convey rather than persuade.
Yeah, it's certainly I engage ideas and present ideas. I have a feeling about these ideas one way or another. But I don't think, hopefully it's not easy to narrow a Bryan Hill story down to a point I'm trying to prove. No, because I just think they're just kind of,
I think the things that are characteristic of what I've read of your work are just helping people to understand these things that we all face. And even though you're using these fictional heroes that are more than life itself to view these things, you're putting them into perspective. It's something, and especially with the globalization of communication, it's something that we can now understand, that whether or not you come from this side of the world or the other side of the world, there are things that we all feel, and mm-hmm. however we react to them and however we interpret them, yes, can change, but we all feel these things, and so do these characters that you're writing. And that's what I think, that's why for me, that's why your arc on Detective is so appealing, because I can't be Batman, right? But I feel the same things, and I felt the same things that Batman is feeling here. That
Right.
feeling,
And you can apply some of those same bat solutions to your life, right? Like in a broad sort of idea way. You might not have a Batmobile and batarangs and all that, but you can approach it with scientific method.
right?
You can approach things rationally. Like Batman refuses to get seduced by the irrationality of his enemies.
Right.
That's something you can use in your daily life, right there. Like, you know what? When someone's mad at me online, ooga booga, ooga booga, ooga booga. Nope. I'm gonna do what Bruce would do, and I've had enough of your games, Joker. Like,
you by doing that, you're denying them the credence of their actions.
Right. And so those are the things that I keep in mind, and making sure things are exciting and some cool stuff blows up and characters look cool.
Yeah. So part of that, we're getting a little bit of love in the chat. So Emmanuel Paredes, he says, "Dude, I love this interview. I'm loving it too. Every second of this is a great chat.
I'm glad. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Ogo F has a comment for you. He said he loved Cassandra's injury under reaction very much in character after her
awesome.
conflict with Karma. Yeah. And Comic Boom actually has a question regarding our what we were just talking about. Did you do a lot of research on Asperger's when writing Mark's character in Postal?
Oh, great question. So for those who haven't read Postal is a book that I wrote for a couple years, and the main character of the book has been diagnosed with Asperger's. He's on that spectrum. So yeah, I did actually. So Matt wanted to tell a story about a character who'd been diagnosed with Asperger's, and he wanted to be a crime story in a small town. And he asked me if I would be interested in writing that. And I'm like, well, yeah, because I'm a big Truman Capote fan, big Thomas Harris fan. I grew up in Missouri, so that kind of like tall tree crime scene sort of storytelling appeals to me. But I didn't know anything about Asperger's or, how it was like to be on that spectrum. Luckily, there are a lot of people on YouTube who talk about it. So I just reached out to YouTubers because I figured if you were talking about it on YouTube, then you were open enough to have a conversation.
Right.
So I'd reach out and I Skype with people and I would just ask them to tell me what it's like.
Right.
And then you just sort of collect those stories and put that in your head. So that was the kind of research I had. Experiential research is sometimes more useful than textbooks.
I'd agree. I think that's to be said pretty much about anything, whether it come to research or the life as a career, anything.
Yeah. I definitely wanted people who had shared that diagnosis with that character to feel that it was, accuracy is weird because you're talking about human beings, but I didn't want them to feel like I was doing like the USA Network Monk version of that, where it's like, look at this idiosyncratic guy. Like, he walks into a room, takes a deep breath, and he knows who did it. Like,
right.
I didn't want to do that. So
that takes the wind out of the story for sure.
A little bit, I didn't want to turn him into like Mr. Magoo or something. Like, I wanted to make sure that he was like a real guy.
Right.
And I've been very grateful for people that have also gotten that diagnosis in their lives, who've bought that book, come up to me and said it means something to them. And there's no better feeling in the world. So yeah,
right.
I didn't do like tons, but I talked to quite a few people for about a couple weeks.
Right. And coattailing off of that, Comic Boom poses a really good question. And he says, is your understanding of autism helpful in writing Cassandra Cain?
Ooh, interesting. No, not because I would never think about it. Frankly, it's because I hadn't considered that.
Right. Yeah. It's something that I wouldn't have thought of either, but it makes sense.
Cassandra Cain, when I write Cassandra Cain, she's very much based on female athletes that I've known, women that were in like private security, ex-military, that kind of competitor's raw intensity, right. And I base a lot of it on that. Martial artists that I've known, because I'm a terrible martial artist, but I know a few pretty good ones. So yeah, that's more of what it is. Like a person who speaks through action,
Mhm.
And has while she has the same doubts and fears that we all have, in one regard, she has a very strong sense of self,
Mhm.
right? Like in combat, she is set free in a way.
Right.
So that's really what I use when I'm a huge fan of the character. I love the character,
Right.
but I'll say it was a Comic Boom.
Comic boom. Yep.
So that is a really interesting idea, Comic Boom. And were I to continue writing her past this arc, I would probably explore that a bit. So thank you.
Yeah, it was a really good point to make, and I think there are a lot of similarities that dwell within the character of Cassandra Cain and what we realize to be autism in
For sure.
the modern scope of things.
For sure.
And so from here, right? So we've talked a little bit about detective, and so right, you've spent a lot of time writing for television, specifically recently, the Titans TV show in the DC universe,
Yeah.
right? And in more than a sense, you are using characters that you would otherwise be able to encounter in comic books and putting them on the screen, right? So how do you think narratively and via the construction of story do you transition from writing something like a comic book to writing a television show?
Well, it's really a matter of efficiency is the first thing you come across, right? So
Right.
Comics are the most efficient kind of script writing you're going to have to do
Mhm.
because you either have 20 or 22 pages. You don't want your pages to have more than 5 panels ideally, and you'd like to have a splash page every issue.
Right.
And in an issue, for a splash page, you need a page leading up to it and a
set
page
it up.
coming. So let's say if you have 20 pages in the story and you got one splash page, well, you really have 17 pages.
Right.
Because 18, 19, and 20, that's your splash page triptych right there.
Mhm.
And then you got 17 pages of story. So and 17, 5 panels on average for each, you run out of space super quickly.
Right.
In a TV script, you have more time, which
Right.
can be a blessing and a curse.
Mhm.
So, like, let's say you have a hypothetical situation where Dick Grayson has to do something in his apartment. Well, in a comic book, you could just pick the 3 panels that you need to show. He picks up the thing, looks at it, figures something out. The window's open, the curtain's blowing. We figured out what he did.
Right.
In a TV show, there's a whole scene there. So you need to make all of it interesting.
Right.
Not just the cool parts, but all of it, right? Like, how is the space interesting? How is the context of this interesting? How is being in this room with Dick Grayson an interesting thing? So in screenwriting and TV writing, you have to invest all of the moments with a sense of tension and purpose because you don't have the ability to just, well, you know what? This part is boring. We don't care how he got from here to there. Well, in a screenplay or a teleplay, you might care.
Right.
So you do have more space, which is great, but you have to also use that space more effectively.
Right. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Being a little bit more of like a visual and mobile medium like television, everything's much more drawn out.
Yeah, for sure.
Where the strength in it, for example, like a book like Watchmen, you have your 9-panel grid, and in every panel, you see a distinct difference from something in the previous panel, and that helps you to understand the direction that you're going in. And that if a panel, for example, you close up on Ozymandias' face, in Doomsday Clock when he finds out about his tumor, whatever, and you have 2 still images or 2 still frames of the same image, it provides this visceral feeling and like this starkness of
what you can do in a book is you can freeze time in a way you can't do in a TV show or a movie. Like, you can play with imagery and context and all of that. Now, what you can't do in a book is really control how fast people get the story. You can pace them through your panel choices and all of that, but a reader can turn the page as fast as they want. In a movie or a television show, you control the pace in an interesting way.
Far more established.
Yeah, so you have to be cognizant of that. and realize like I'm in charge of this pacing. So this pacing has to be pitch perfect because they can't control my pacing. So I need to make sure it's there. You know, it's not like, you know, well, you know, you're reading a comic and you're like, okay, I can kind of get through that and get to the splash page and the rest of it. So yeah, they're different forms that sort of inform each other, but it's really two different fighting styles, writing a script for actors and writing a comic book project.
Right. And so I feel like to the general public, you know, being in a writer's room for a television show, most people don't quite understand the difference, I guess, between writing, you know, in a group with collaborators, you know, like, you know, guys such as you and Jeff Johns in a writer's room versus being like a showrunner for a TV show. So would you mind explaining for myself and for the audience what the distinct difference is between being someone who is the quote unquote showrunner and someone who collaborates in the writer's room?
Oh, for sure. So the showrunner is really the auteur of the show. Now, in the case of Titans, we had sort of three kings in that show. We had Greg Walker, the showrunner. We had Akiva Goldsman and Jeff Johns, who are also showrunners, producers, all of it. But your job when you're not at that level is to support the vision of the people that are at that level.
Right.
So the easiest way I can explain it would be the showrunner calls the plays from the booth, and then the writers are the athletes that run the play.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes depending on your level as a quarterback, you might be able to call an audible as long as you inform upstairs, like, this is why you're going to do it. Hey, we should run because I can see the linebacker's limping and he can't stop it.
Right.
Like, you can do that sort of thing, but generally you just want to execute the showrunner's vision. So when the showrunner wants to throw, you throw.
Right.
Showrunner wants to run, you run. And that's your job, is to support what they want to accomplish.
Right. So if I understand this correctly, the responsibility of a showrun is moreover to give you the playbook, right? This is where our story is going to. And
you might break the story together, but the showrunner is the one who makes a decision about what stays on the board and what gets taken off of it.
Okay.
Right. So everyone fires off their ideas, and then the showrunner's like, okay, we're going to do that, and then we'll use that, and then we'll do that. And they determine sort of what sticks and what doesn't. Right. When you're just a writer in the writer's room, your job is to contribute with ideas, hopefully interesting ideas.
Right.
And to solve problems. Right. So what you don't want to do in a writer's room, or really any collaborative situation, is bring up a problem without a potential solution.
Right.
Now, you might have a bad solution, but it's better to bring up a problem with a bad solution than just to be like, I don't think Act 2 works because of this. You know, and then, but if you're not, you know, helping them, then you're not helping the process. So
right.
When you have minds like, you know, like Akiva and Jeff and Greg, you know, you're really along for the ride a lot of the time, because you know, those three fellows have told a lot of stories. So yeah, you know, in that situation, you know, we would just sort of throw out ideas. What if this happened? What if that happened? What if this happened? Right. And then as things start to solidify, you start to kind of help refine it, you know, and you got to recognize what point in the process is it good to just fire off ideas. And then what point in the process where you should be refining the ideas that are already there, you know, like kind of reading that room, be like, you know what, I might have a left turn way to do this, but this isn't the time to bring up my left turn. Right. It's better to figure out like what's the easiest way for them to take the path they're already on. But yeah, that's what TV writing is. What's great for me, because as a comic book writer or a screenwriter, you're alone. You do that work by yourself. Right. You have editors, producers, but by yourself. So collaboration is fun. Right.
I mean, yeah. So I guess too, how do you think, and especially, you know, from what I understand with DC in particular doing a lot with like writing summits, do you see there being an intersection between DC promoting these writer summits where you all get together and you break story and you discuss characters, and how the collaboration runs in a writer's room for a TV show?
It's a bit similar, but also different. You know, I mean, in a writer's room, you're seeing the same group of writers every day, right?
Right.
For 8 hours, 9 hours a day, and you're all in the same room together, eating lunch together. Sometimes you're hanging out and getting drinks afterwards. So you're sort of always aware of the team. And like a DC writer summit, you know, some of those people, you just might not see them for a year, right? Like until the next one, you know, like, and me, I'm very new to Big Two. I've written comics for about 10 years, but they've mostly been indie comics, like Image, Top Cow, right? Like that kind of stuff. So I barely knew anybody in there. I knew Scott because I had sat in a panel with him a couple of years earlier for my book Romulus, an Image book that I did. I knew like my editor was there, but most of those people I met the first time. Like I met Joel Jones for the first time there. I met Tom King in person for the first time there.
Right.
So it's what's really useful. Well, at least for me, was I got to see really strong storytellers articulate what they wanted to do in their own words. And that kind of helped inform me and the choices that I make. And there's certainly, like, when you're in a room with like Brian Bendis, obviously there's like an energy to that. You know, when you're in a room with like Kelly Sue DeConnick, there's an energy to that for sure. But most of the time after that's all done, we all go to our little hovels and you know, and punch the keys. So it's not a particularly social endeavor, but TV writing is definitely more of a social kind of bit of creativity,
more collaborative. Yeah.
I mean, you're just, because it's a lot of people time, man. You just spend a lot of time with those people,
right? And so, and going into your time on Titans, right? I imagine that you probably have characters that you wanted to write going into it, or that you were interested in exploring, and characters that you became more interested in after the process, right? So we have a good question in the chat from Andrew. He says, I know you probably can't say too much about the show, but do you have a favorite character on Titans? And my question, elaborating on that, is, do you have a character that you started out thinking, oh, it's going to be so great, I'm so excited to write this character and bring them to life on the screen? And then did you have a character that coming out of it, you're like, wow, this was an experience?
Well, full confession. I was a Batman kid growing up. And that means that I didn't really read a lot of the Titans growing up. I read, like, when I was collecting, I collected Batman. I think in my pull box were like the 3 different, like, Batman, Detective, Shadow the 4, and Legends, right? So I had 4 comics a month I was reading that were all Batman,
right?
And then I had Action Comics, and then Superman, and then Captain America. And that was what I was reading month to month. So I didn't read a lot of the Teen Titans as a kid. And I've my feelings on Robin have kind of always gone back and forth. You know,
Dick in particular, or the construction of Robin?
Robin as a concept. Because part of me, like half of me, is like, I totally get what Robin does for the character. The other part of me is like, how could Bruce Wayne put a child in this much danger? Right? You know, like, I can't shut that part of my brain off, you know?
And I think that's too part of Bruce's flaw as a character, right? Because I think he understands this danger, but his overwhelming sense to, like we were saying before, prevent this child from feeling the same way he felt, or continuing to feel that same way.
It's like, that's the only way he knew how to help, right? Because that's the way he helped himself. So that's just what he knows how to do, you know? So I hadn't really read a lot of Batman and Robin stuff. I mean, you know, when Robin would show up, like, you know, he was in the Bat books of like Batman Robin fighting Magpie or something. He would be there. Death in the Family, you know, obviously the whole thing, Jason Todd. So I was pretty ignorant to a lot of the Titans work going in. I mean, I had seen the cartoon, you know, because the cartoon's dope.
Right.
And I was familiar that way. So I didn't, you know, have a lot of opinion kind of going into it, honestly. I mean, as soon as I decided I'd work on the show, I consumed all of Marv Wolfman's stuff that I could get my hands on, and I got up to speed very, very quickly.
I feel like, that's the first thing that anybody leads to when it comes to the Titans.
Right. Yeah, like you need to know that stuff. And again, like these characters really matter to people, and I wasn't just
Right.
going to come in there with no idea of how all of this works for them. So I was going to know. But yeah, I went in pretty open, man. I mean, Jeff and Akiva and Greg had such a strong vision for what they wanted to do
Right.
that uh, you're sort of walking into a plan. Is
Right.
the best way I can say it, you know?
Right. And Jeff in particular, he's had, you know, a pretty lengthy run on the Teen Titans himself.
Yeah, I
So
mean, it's when you're in a room with Jeff and you're talking comic books,
mhm.
you should be listening.
Yeah. Oh, I mean,
like if you catch yourself talking and Jeff Johns is in the room, stop talking and listen.
I understand that even on the perspective of a fan, you know, I went to his panel at New York Comic Con on Doomsday Clock, and I had a friend of mine with me who's not super comic book savvy, but he turns over to me and tries to talk, and I almost like cover his face with my hand, and I was like, Jeff's talking.
I mean, the first day I was in the room, you know, Jeff was kind of explaining what he wanted to do and all that, and you know, everyone was giving ideas. And I didn't talk for like the first 3 hours because I'm like, well, I just want to listen to Jeff Johns break stories. I'm learning right now, you know, like this is class right now. But yeah, so I went in like pretty open-minded, which is generally a good idea. If you're going to go into a situation where you're working on legacy characters and you know that there's going to be some kind of vision in place, the less you're precious about things, the more fun you're going to have because you know, you want to be open to things. And coming out of it, no, I mean, I wasn't down on any of the characters, so that didn't really change. Yeah, I mean, I just came out of it with a greater understanding of the characters, I guess.
Fair enough.
But yeah, I mean, it was a pretty pleasant experience. You know, I mean, I don't have any negative Titan stories. It was a really great room to be in and a really cool show to be a part of. So, you know, those emotions kind of overrode whatever creative difficulty I would have in the moment, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm sure, you know, these characters being in the DC universe, it probably informs your work as a comic book writer now too, right?
It does. You know, it's everything affects everything.
Right.
I'll tell you what, the reality of it all did not hit me until the first time I was on set and Brenton had the Robin suit on.
Oh, yeah.
And then it hits you, right? Like it's real then. Like, because I'd met him before, because he came into the writer's room. It was very nice of him to come in and like talk to the writers and all that. He's a great guy, you know, really cool guy, really interesting guy. And, you know, so you're relating to him as an actor and, you know, the whole thing. But when he came onto set and he had the Robin outfit, you're like,
oh my God,
man, that's Robin.
Right. Yeah.
Like, that's Robin, right? You know, and I'm like 12 years old for like a second. So there were a lot of like little moments kind of like that, you know, where you're the reality of what you're doing and how it can likely affect people becomes very clear very quickly. So yeah, but yeah, it was a great experience. And you know, loved everyone I was working with. I was really grateful and happy to be there.
Yeah, I mean, side note, just when that picture of him in the suit showed up on the internet, I almost lost my mind. Like that suit looks so good.
Yeah, that kid looks like Robin, man. Like,
oh my gosh,
it's a lot, you know.
It's
a lot.
Surreal. It's so surreal. So I guess talking about Robins, a random question for you: who's your favorite Robin? I feel like I have to ask that. You're writing a Batman book.
Oh, I mean, you know, like when you say Robin, I immediately see Dick Grayson.
Right.
Right? Like that's just how my mind works. Because I grew up watching syndicated, you know, na. Like I was, you know, like so Burt Ward and all that. Like that's just kind of how I see Robin. So Robin for me is Dick Grayson.
Right.
But if I like think past the emotion of it and all of that, no, probably still Dick Grayson, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, I like all of them as characters. I like Jason Todd. I like Tim Drake, Carrie Kelly.
They all serve a very distinct purpose.
Yeah, for sure. It's just that I think the mythology of the circus and the parents
Right.
and the Thing and the Gymnast to the Robin and the rest of it. Like, I don't know, man. It's just kind of hard, like, to look past all of that, because that was such an important part of that mythos for me as a kid.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you in some sense. I think when I think Robin, I think Tim Drake, the character of Tim Drake, ultimately elevated the role of Robin to something new and something different.
Well,
As a
Tynion had a lot to do with that, right?
Yeah.
Like, he did fantastic work with Tim.
Yeah, I mean his detective run for me consistently through the beginning of DC Rebirth was my favorite Bat book coming out. And there were some good Bat books coming out, like
Right.
All-Star Batman, good stuff. You know, Tom King, you know, taking his approach on Batman, whether it be, you know, it's divisive, but there are ultimately some very valuable things that come out of his Batman. So there's a lot of stiff competition because everybody wants to write a Batman book, and B, you know, DC as a company wants to put out as much Batman as they can because they know people will read Batman. So yeah, I mean, ultimately that's a long-winded way of me saying I agree.
Well, Tynion did fantastic work with the Bat family, especially with Tim. You know, he understood them so well, and kind of gave them kind of some heft and some weight that I think is very useful to the universe. And you know, when you're writing an ongoing thing like that, at least for me, I think in the back of my head, am I doing things that will make this a more interesting universe?
Right.
You know, like, am I contributing to this mythos in a positive way? And until I sort of feel that way, I'm like, I don't want to do that because I want to leave the house in order. You know, I want to make sure that I'm doing things that are cool and they're adding rather than subtracting.
Yeah, you want to have your time with the toys, but you still have to put them neatly back in the toy box.
Well, like when the story is over, you know, if someone wants to dig into karma, that's not me. That would be like the coolest thing in the world, right? Like, you know, like that's the great thing about comics is you sort of create these toys and everyone else can sort of play with these toys and turn them into their own things.
Right. And I mean, I think that's the mark of a good character when somebody decides to do that with something you've created.
Oh yeah, no greater honor than someone like taking a character you created and deciding to spend their own creativity on doing something with it.
Right. And I mean, I think that's something that will happen with karma. I mean, ultimately, I don't know the results of your run on Batman, but as of, you know, issue 985 of Detective Comics, he's a compelling and interesting character, you know, and he's a character that people can use later to continuously challenge Batman on a different level that none of his other villains in his rogue gallery do the same way he does.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, hopefully, yeah, it's you want the things that you create in these universes to have some endurance for people so that you can feel like, you know, you added a brick to the wall, so to speak. So and I'll tell you, like, everyone has been super kind, like Tom, you know, Scott, James, Peter. They've been nothing but supportive of me throughout this whole process, and it's really great. Like, the real Bat family is in the offices of the people that make the books. You know, that's the family, right? And we're all sort of part of that. And I can't be more grateful to these guys for, you know, just kind of opening up the whole thing and saying, "Hey, man, we support what you want to do. Let me know what you need from us."
Right.
That's what Scott said to me from the first phone call I had with him about it. The first thing he said was, "Hey, you just let me know what you need from me. And I want you to tell the best story you can." So, you know, there's some great group of people over there.
And as a fan, I mean, for you, I imagine being a lifetime fan, that must be so surreal, you know?
Everything about this is surreal. Like, I've been lucky enough to have done some cool things, you know, in my time being a creator. But there's nothing more surreal than seeing an issue of Detective Comics with my name on it.
Yeah.
Right? Like that goes beyond any screenplay sale I've had, any television job I've had, any celebrity I've met. Is just, I tell you what, you can always tell by Facebook, right? So, you know, you put the thing that, Brian sold a screenplay to whatever, or Brian got hired to work in this TV thing. Yeah, and you know, people are like, "Oh, yeah, good for you. Golf clap." When people I grew up with saw I was writing Batman, like, everybody chimed in. They
Right.
were all just like, this is so awesome. You did the thing you were talking about doing when you were like 12.
Right.
Like, I can't believe you stuck to it that long. Like, you should see like people that, you know, I hadn't talked to in a super long time, took the time out to, you know, kind of chime in and say, hey man, you know, good job. Glad to see that you just like kind of stuck to it. So it's crazy, dude. Like, it's like people, most people thankfully have enjoyed it. I think so.
I mean, if
I've
they
got some good reactions. There's a couple YouTubes out there where people, you know, don't like it at all, and I can only feel surrealist gratitude that some stranger is taking the time with my Batman issue to explain how I'm like a scourge on storytelling. You know, like, that's kind of awesome, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, man, like, sorry you didn't like it. Hopefully you'll like, you know, you'll like the next one. But like, I can't get, it doesn't even stress me out because you're just like, this is the weirdest thing in the world. I'm just some guy, man. So it's fun.
I mean, you're not some guy. You're the executive branch of the Hill administration. I mean, there's got to be some.
True.
There's got to be some.
I am the executive branch of the Hill administration. Vote Hill 2020.
I'll vote it, man. Hill Detective Comics 2020.
That's it. That's right. That's what I'm gonna do.
I mean, that's the best thing about reading comic books is because when you read a good comic, 9 times out of 10, it's from a fan of the comic book. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it is a fan cycle, right? Like we grow up reading these things and loving these things and sharing them, and then some of us stick to it long enough to actually get to execute some of it, and then you get to be a small part of the mythos,
right?
You know, and the way comics works is it's so insane. You do like one thing, and then suddenly you're on a panel with Tom King and Peter Tomasi, and like you know, like Joel is right here on my right, and Tom is here on my left, and you're like, I'm just a dude, I'm just here.
Yeah.
Like I was just walking into a LCS, picking up, you know, I Am Batman, just like a little while ago, and now you're kind of on this thing with the thing. It would be like making one film, and then suddenly you're sitting next to Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
So comics is insane like that. And yeah, all of it's been a pretty surreal trip.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, time back into, you did, you know, being a fan, you said a lot of your influence stems from somebody like Frank Miller. And so I was wondering, what creators in comics do you think most influence your work as a comic book writer?
Ooh, Lord. Well, I tell you what, before I'll even hold it up. Hold on. So this book, Elektra Assassin by Frank Miller and Bill Sienkiewicz, this is probably my biggest influence. I read a few pages of this before I write any issue of anything.
Really?
And it's just, I don't know, man. Like it's just so like kind of radically masterful in its construction. Like holding up so people can see just how nuts some of this art is, you know?
Yeah.
It's so passionate, and Frank's sense of pace and poetry is just so strong in this thing. And look at that grid. That grid is crazy.
Yeah.
Bananas. So this is a huge influence, and you can tell because it's right by my desk. And my other influence is also right by my desk.
Oh wow.
So Arkham Asylum.
Right.
You know, Grant Morrison, right? Because, you know, this was the book that taught me that comics were always going to be with me as I grew up, that they were literature, you know, and I didn't have to put them down just because I was reading Hemingway, Faulkner, Joan Didion, whatever it was.
Yeah.
I could still read this alongside it and get something. So yeah, I would say those two works are probably my biggest influences on most of my writing, even though like you don't see a lot of Arkham Asylum or Elektra Assassin in my scripts.
Right.
But they give me the energy to create. I read a couple pages of Elektra Assassin and I want to write.
Right.
I want to create something.
I mean, that's how it should be. I mean, you know, for me, Scott Snyder, you know, Court of the Owls was one of the things that got me to nosedive into comic books.
Oh yeah, that's
and
amazing.
I think works like that and like Arkham Asylum and among other things that have literary merit to them challenge, I guess, like the greater social idea and vision of what a comic book is, right? Because for me, like I didn't get into comic books until I was like 14 or 15, which compared to most people is late, right? Most people start reading comics when they're young. And while I was while I was young, you know, when I told my mom at 15, 16, it's like, oh, I want to read a comic book. I was like, why are you reading comic books? You know, it's like you're a smart kid. What the hell are you doing? And it's like
you're totally, you know, like well behaved and you have a future. Don't ruin it on comic books.
Right. And so it's like I remember specifically like first time I read Dark Knight Returns, I'm sitting there like having dinner with my mom, and I'm just like, Mom, like everything you ever said about comic books is wrong. Like,
well,
and
that's the Frank Miller experience, right? Like
right.
when you read Frank Miller, you stop on occasion and look around just to see, like, y'all know what's happening in this book right now?
Right, yeah. And
y'all know what I just read?
And
he punched Superman.
Yeah.
Like this is happening right now. You
know?
It's crazy. Like that's what I love about the experience is you read Sin City or you read like Year One. And you're like, and he rang the bell because now he knows he's going to be Batman because the bat came in and now he's going to do it. And people are looking at you like you are a crazy person. They have no idea what you just experienced.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's a turning point. Like just because these characters historically have been written in a campy, more innocent and youthful tone doesn't mean that these same characters can't be used to push forward certain concepts and ideas that we can deal with on a mature and quote unquote adult level, you know? And that's what changed her. I'm sitting here like recounting to her, you know, the duality of Batman and Bruce Wayne and how it's perceived as almost a misfunction of Bruce Wayne's mental state, right? In The Dark Knight Returns and how, you know, there's the political, there's political atmosphere in the book.
Well, it's the passion you want to share. You know, like you have this great experience with this narrative, and you just want to share it with someone else so they can have that experience, and then you can like kind of go over that experience together. And it's such a, I think for a lot of, for at least for me, I don't want to say for a lot of kids because you know, I'll just talk about myself anecdotally. Mm-hmm. Comics were the first things I bought with my own money. Mm. And it mattered. Like I would take my money, my allowance. I would go to a comic book store. I would buy comics, or I would go to a 7-Eleven and get a Slurpee, and I would, you know, get a comic because they had comics there back in the day. Yeah. And there was an intimacy with it, right? It was like your thing, you know. Like anything else, I needed help to get. I had to go get the video game. Then mom had to help me do that, or you know, I wanted to get the CD. I want to get the new NWA album. Well, I wasn't old enough to buy that, so I had to get, you know, Tony from across the street to give me the NWA. But comics, I could just walk into the store with my own money and buy, and you had a real ownership of the experience. You know, it really it mattered to me, I think, growing up as a thing. And books in general have that kind of unique level of agency, you know, that you have, because you can go to a library and you can check them out and nobody knows the crazy stuff you're reading, but you can read all the crazy stuff. And that's the kind of thing I love about the medium in general. But I should probably get out of here soon. Okay. I just glanced up and looked at the time and I was like, okay, it's about 9 o'clock Pacific. I should probably get out of here. But if there are any more questions that people have, I can answer them. And then if not, they can find me on Twitter. At Bryan Edward Hill is my Twitter. Feel free to ask me questions there.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, if anybody has any quick questions, we might be able to fire off a couple quick fire questions. But I mean, yeah, topically, it's powerful once people realize what you can do with a comic book, both visually and in the literature, you know.
Totally.
And that's something that I think that I appreciate about modern storytelling, because you look at characters like Batman and Superman, it's like ultimately these are works of literary merit, you know.
Oh, absolutely. For sure. it's you know they matter because we kind of grow up with them, and as we evolve, they evolve. And you can age your way through Superman stories or Batman stories. I mean, you don't start a kid off with year one.
No,
You
no.
start a kid off with, Super Friends, or, something a little bit more like, a little
Or
easier to come.
yeah, or like the Batman animated series.
Batman animated series. And then you kind of, grow up through these things. And as your life is getting more complex, the stories are getting more complex. And it's this kind of living mythology that stays with you. And I think it's very, very important. Like I remember, so I wrote a Dolph Lundgren movie. That was the first movie that I wrote that got produced. The only feature that I've written that's gotten produced. I've sold a bunch of features, but they haven't gotten made. This Dolph Lundgren movie got made. I was like 24 or something when I sold it. And I was in Bulgaria when they were shooting it, because they were shooting it in and around Bulgaria. The production it's cheaper to shoot in Bulgaria than to shoot in the States. So we're out in this Romani village because the movie's called The Russian Specialist in the States. I think it's called The Mechanic in Europe. I'm not sure, but so part of the story, Dolph's character had to do a standoff in a village, in like a Romani village, against these bad guys. So we were scouting locations and we were going to things. So you do a location scout, you all pile into a bus, and then you go to the location, you walk around, and you take pictures and the whole thing. I was just a writer, so I didn't have to do all of that, but I was still there to be there.
Right.
And I don't speak any Bulgarian. I certainly don't speak Romani. So I could not communicate with the locals there.
Yeah, that must have made it difficult.
But a kid came up and just gave me a hug out of the blue, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, sure, kid, have a good day. And I didn't like, why did kid hug me? What? Yeah. And then when he stopped hugging and then backed up, he pointed at me and he said Superman. And I realized that I had a Superman symbol t-shirt on. And he just knew that a person wearing that symbol was a good person. I was a young kid.
That's powerful.
He was like 3 or 4 or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But he just knew that he might have never seen a black person a day in his life, right? Like he's in Bulgaria. He's a Romani. It's a Romani village where it feels like the Old West, but nothing mattered but that symbol. That symbol showed that kid, you must be a good guy, right? And maybe he's never been around a person that had a Superman t-shirt before, because maybe he's never seen a Superman t-shirt. I don't even know. Like, know, but it really showed me the universal power of these characters and what they mean to people.
They transcend society, and they transcend time, being as old as they are. Storytelling is as old as time itself, but these characters in particular, 80 plus years, and there's no end in sight in any medium.
It's amazing. Like, you wear a Batman t-shirt with like the bat symbol on it, and you're going to walk around and people are going to be like, hey man, my shirt.
Yeah.
Cool. I like that shirt. Right. And to have something like that can unify people so quickly is a really special thing. And it's again, like, super humbling to be a small part of that whole deal.
And you're doing a damn good job of it, man. So,
well, thank you. I mean, that's really kind of you to say. I really do appreciate it.
No, I mean, I've enjoyed every bit of your detective. I started reading your Michael Cray, and as someone who's never really been interested in Wildstorm characters, I'm here. Like, I'm like, wow, I really want to know what happened.
Oh, the second half of it gets really nuts and cool, because that's when Constantine comes in.
Oh my god!
Yeah,
everything gets better.
Yeah, you got it. Warren Ellis was like, you know what, Brian, do whatever you want. I was like, cool.
That's gotta say something. If someone like Warren Ellis says, you know what, here's the keys to my Porsche.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how he still feels about it. I should try to check in with him about it.
I mean, I'm sure if he had a problem with it, he'd take the keys back, but he hasn't. So,
but yeah, for sure. It's been a fun one too, working with Warren. That's been great.
That's awesome. We did get a couple people in the chat just firing off a couple quick questions.
Yeah. Cool.
So Emmanuel asks, what would be, if you could write any DC comic character, what would you like to write? Like, who is your ideal character to write right now?
Dr. Fate.
If you write it, I'll buy it. I promise you that, because that's something I'd want to see.
It's always right. So when people ask me about that, like it's always like, well, I wrote Batman, so
logistically, yeah.
It's either The Question or Dr. Fate, and it depends on the day you ask me.
Right.
But those, I like the kind of weird, off to the side, like
yeah.
I like the deep cuts.
Would you?
They aren't the deepest cuts, but they're certainly deeper than like Flash or Green Lantern, what have you.
And elaborating on that, right? Obviously, there's two big iterations of both those characters. If you were to do The Question, would it be Vic Sage or Renee Montoya? And if it were Dr. Fate, would it be Kent Nelson or Khalid Nassour?
With Fate, it would probably be Khalid with Kent in the story.
Mm-hmm.
The Question, I mean, since it's just us chickens on the internet,
right?
I would probably lead off with like the Unforgiven version of a Vic Sage story, and then bring in Renee afterwards.
Okay,
like it's because the second iteration of those characters didn't negate the first. Right. It wasn't like a full-on replace. It was sort of like a hand-me-down.
It's the legacy. Yeah,
it's the legacy. I'd like to involve kind of all of it, in either story, whether it's Fate or The Question, because I think they both serve the narrative in different ways. So I wouldn't be exclusive to one or the other, but yeah, I'd probably engage everyone.
After you brought up Dr. Fate, Manny also writes in all caps, "I'll buy it." So you have two people right now ready to buy the book.
That's two right there. I'll go tell Dan DiDio.
Hey, you know what? It's something. And then Ogo F has a pretty good question. He says, "I need to know, does Wu-Tang Clan still pose threat to the Hill administration? Because you promised to tell the story if someone asked about it on a podcast."
Oh, okay. Okay. I will end with this story, right?
Okay.
This is actually a good end of the thing story. So I was in NYU and I was in film school. I went to film school and I didn't have a lot of money to make films. So I did mostly writing, but I would look for opportunities to make films. So I met this guy from Staten Island who told me that he was friends with the Wu-Tang Clan and they wanted to shoot a video for these two new groups they have. One was called The Massive and the other was called The Deadly Venoms. Deadly Venoms was a all female rap group and The Massive was like a secondary Wu-Tang Clan or something. So I was supposed to go to Staten Island and like do location scouts and everything was supposed to be taken care of. And I get to Staten Island and it's crazy, right? Like I was supposed to meet with people at like 2:00 p.m. I got there at noon. I didn't really get to meet with people until like 8 or 9. And it wasn't the Wu-Tang Clan. Yeah. It was like everyone who hangs around the Wu-Tang Clan. Yeah. And then Capadonna showed up and like Method Man walked through for a second. And I'm like, I have to get back to Manhattan because I need to, my dorm and all that. I didn't know when the last ferry was. I didn't want to miss the ferry. So then a guy who was managing the Deadly Venoms part of it, I think. And I'm not gonna tell you his name because I don't want him suing me or something. But he got really mad and was like, you're not keeping up your end of the bargain, and he got really irate, wanted to talk to me out on the porch. So I went out to the porch with him, and he just cold cocked me.
What a dick!
Right across the face, and he had a ring. So the ring split my lip. So I have a scar. You can't see it. But I have a scar right here from my lip just split open. Boom.
Wow.
So because I had a little training, I didn't fall down. Because if you get like cold cocked, don't go down. Right? Even if you stumble, whatever it is, because if you go down, you start getting kicked, start getting stomped. And that's when you get the real injuries. Right. So he hit me with this like kind of quick one. And like boom, a lip split open. I stumble back. Suddenly, I've got blood all over the front of my jacket. It's just like a nightmare scenario. Then a guy behind me pulled out a 9mm because I guess that's what they, I don't know. Maybe thought I might have had. I don't know what's going on, but I'm I'm like trying to get my bearings. I see the guy behind me has a 9mm out. I'm like, well, that's not good. I'm gonna die on this porch in Staten Island. This is no good.
How will I write to comics now?
How am I gonna write comic books now? This is really Bruce Wayne would have never gotten himself into this situation. I'm a fool. And I don't really know which member it was, but one of the Wu-Tang Clan, it could have been Capadonna, it could have been Method Man, it might have been like Ghostface, I don't remember. Somebody from the Wu-Tang Clan came out to the porch and like de-escalated the situation.
Yeah.
Right. They were like, yo, college kid, let's not kill him. Right? Kind of like one of those, right? Yeah. And so I'm sitting there bleeding. And then eventually they got me off of Staten Island into the city, and I went to the NYU like hospital where like, you know, the students would go.
The infirmary, yeah.
Yeah, that infirmary, and I got sewed up. They sewed my lip up, and my face was like puffy for, you know, a few days afterwards. But yeah, that was the Wu-Tang Clan thing. And then about a couple years later, I saw the guy that punched me in a burrito joint, like around the block from, I was still in school. I think this was like sophomore year. I got hit. So about senior year, or it might have been right after I graduated, I saw this cat in a burrito joint. And he had, funny, I had picked up a little muscle, because that's what happens after your face gets exploded in Staten Island. You start lifting weights. So I had picked up a little bit of muscle, and he had actually lost muscle mass. So when I saw him, I was like a little bigger than he was.
So so in the words of Obi, you had the high ground.
Yeah, I might have had the high ground, Anakin. But like I was like with a bunch of friends. So he looks up from his burrito like it's the gangster movie when Denzel isn't dead yet. Yeah. I was like, oh no, this is when he says something cool, and then I shoot him, and then the soul music starts playing, right? Like he thought the whole thing was gonna happen. And he looks at me, and I look at him, and I just kind of give him that look like whatever the look was, what it articulated was, how about we forget that happened so we don't have to deal with this anymore. And I'm not going to talk to you, but we don't have a problem.
Yeah.
And he gave me a look that said, yeah, I would prefer that. And then I just ordered my food and I left.
Jesus.
And I don't know where he is now. I haven't seen him since. That's why I didn't want to bring his name up, because we're like cool, and I don't want people like, I don't know what this cat's doing. He could be on Twitter or something. I don't want a bunch of Hill voters running after my man. But yeah, man, it was a little scary for a bit. Like when I saw the 9mm come out, I'm like, really? This is how I die on a porch in Staten Island?
What an experience. Jesus.
You're sitting there like, you're like, well, this isn't how I die. I don't know how I die, but I don't die like this.
Yeah. I still have to write Batman.
I have Batman to write.
Yeah.
I have a BMW to chase down in the Ford one day. I can't die on this porch.
Yeah. Oh man, so, that's wild. I'm really glad that he asked that question.
So that's my Wu-Tang. So the moral of the story is, when you're having a shouting match with somebody, make sure you're not standing close enough to get hit.
Yeah.
And if they're wearing a ring, really make sure you're not standing close enough to get hit.
Yeah. Moral of the story. If we've learned anything throughout this 2 hours of talking, it's that.
It's that. I still have the scar. It's my Wu-Tang scar right there.
Hey, it's a battle scar.
Yeah, you know, I survived, I guess.
It informs some part of you, you know.
But I can confirm that the Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to F with.
No, apparently they're not.
I will fit the Hill administration endorses that opinion. This
Wu-Tang Clan alone. This interview was probably one of the most informative experiences of my life, right? We go from the philosophical aspects of life and dealing with hardships and fear to learning the concepts of storytelling between different mediums, right? And understanding that we learn about how not to fuck with the Wu-Tang Clan or any member of their establishment.
Don't do it. Just
And the one thing that people should learn is that everybody in the chat should be reading Detective Comics right now because it's damn good.
And I can't see the chat the way I have my windows up, but I just want to thank everyone for hanging out and for asking questions. And
this was
dude is really cool. So you guys need to come every time he does a video. I expect to see y'all there. If I don't, I'll have words about it because this is the place to be.
So this was fantastic. Bryan, I can't thank you enough for being on the show and taking the time out of your day to interact and let your fans get to know you.
Well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been awesome. And
it's always so much. It's always so. I don't know the proper word to use. It's always so freeing when you find out someone who you love in the creative sphere is also a great person, and through the conversation with you, I think that the cool part about this interview was, yes, we talked about comics, and that was the ultimate goal of things, right? To talk about comic books and the things that you and I and the people that have been watching have a mutual love for, but we got across a lot of different topics and how they all intersect. So, if that can inform the audience here that are watching this, that there's a lot that you have to say in your writing, you know what I mean? And all I can tell them is through and I'm sure they know this by watching this interview with you, man, that they should be reading excuse my French, they should be reading whatever the fuck you put out. You put out a Doctor Strange book, or I'm sorry, a Dr. Fate book, they should read it. You put out a question book, they should read it.
Well, I appreciate that, man. I tell you what, if I do put out a Dr. Fate or a question book, you should read it because it's going to be dope.
Oh, dude, I know.
It's going to be crazy.
Let me tell you, man. Crazy. I'm reading Detective Comics by a guy named Bryan Edward Hill. And if he writes the question or Dr. Fate, you better bet I'm putting down my money. Okay.
I'll do my thing on those, man. I'll do my thing on those. Well, I appreciate the support. And I'm genuinely grateful and humbled by anyone who will sit and listen to me prattle on for a couple hours, just banging on about whatever. So thank you so much.
This was a great conversation, and I thank you too on a personal level, because the conversation that we had, pretty much at the first hour of this entire interview was you helping not only myself, but I'm sure a number of people in the audience realizing how to deal with adversity and how to overcome the fear and the ambiguity of future. So thank you.
Well, you got to give back, man. Like I said, I don't have like the 12 rules for life, but I do try to, it's just like Dark Knight Rises, right? You climb out of the hole, then you got to throw the rope back down. Mm-hmm. Bruce didn't just walk away.
Yeah. He climbs
back down, right? That's what we got to do. We all have to climb out of our holes. We got to make that jump. I mean, if we do escape, when we escape, throw a rope back down and help everyone else get up there too.
Yeah. I mean, this was an incredibly informative, this was the best way I could have spent the last 2 hours, of my day.
I'm really happy to hear that.
It was a great conversation, and I loved picking your brain a little bit about the creative process and the storytelling. And I would very much love it if again we were able to have you on and discuss a little bit more about the writing process and how you approach breaking story.
I tell you what, when Titans premieres, we can do something around that.
That sounds great.
Because then we can get into the whole thing and we can talk about, I can get into the nitty gritty of writing and the rest of it for sure.
Yeah, that and your Detective Comics 5-issue arc will be done, so we can kind of give.
And then we can do like a post-mortem on the whole deal.
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to do that. So again, Bryan, thank you so much for being on. I had a great time. I'm sure the people in the audience had a great time. And for all of you in the chat, Detective Comics number 986 does come out next week. This coming Wednesday. So you should be picking it up. Fortunately, it's 5 issues total. So if you haven't caught on yet, go back, start with issue 983, read 984, read 985, read the story. It's a great story. If you're a Batman fan, if you're a fan of storytelling, if you are someone who enjoys stories of the human condition, go read the book. You're not going to regret it. I certainly have it. We'll be actually doing a review soon of Batman 985 that should be coming out within the next day or so, along with a couple other great books. But again, it's another book that doesn't disappoint. So, Bryan, thank you so much for being on. And again, we'll definitely keep in touch about having you on again.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'll definitely be on here again. Awesome. So no worries.
Do you have any closing words for the people of the internet?
Drink water, eat your veggies, achieve your dreams.
Buy the car you want. Buy the car.
Buy the car you want, man.
All right. Well, ending it off, we do have someone in the chat, all caps, just says, "Dude, you're awesome."
You're awesome, whoever that is.
So closing out, if you guys aren't already, definitely go follow Bryan on Twitter, follow him on Instagram, follow him on all the social medias. Go read his books. You know, he's a great guy. And you know what? Before we scheduled this interview, he was super, super attentive to answering questions on his Twitter about writing and about storytelling. You know, before we had this talk, I don't know if you remember, I was the guy bothering you about asking about a book. Like, what book can I read to preface the context of storytelling and structure? And you had brought up the Stephen King.
On writing. Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, definitely, guys, go follow him on social media. He's a great guy to interact with. Go read his books. If you aren't already, definitely subscribe so you can see Bryan come back on again and discuss Detective. And we'll definitely be reviewing his books along the line. So thank you guys for watching. I think we're going to cut the broadcast here. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your night. And thank you all for
have a good night, everybody.
Bye, guys.